There is a smell that a lot of people associate with their parents' house, a kind of warm, closed-in quiet, the faint scent of old wood and something cooking slow on a stove. And in that memory, there's usually a person who didn't seem to have a lot, but somehow always had enough. They never talked about money. They never complained about money. But when something broke, they fixed it. When something was needed, it appeared. And when they passed, there was always something left over. You probably know someone like that. You might even be related to them. Now here's the part that keeps me up at night. According to a 2025 Federal Reserve survey, the median American household has $8,000 in liquid savings. The median, which means half the country has less than that. And yet, if you look at Japan, a country with a lower average income than the United States, the household savings rate is more than 4 times higher. 4 times. My name is Randy, and I have spent a genuinely embarrassing amount of time trying to understand why two countries with similar levels of industrialization and consumer culture can produce such different financial outcomes for regular people. Here is what this video is actually about. It is not about Japan being perfect. It is not about romanticizing a culture from the outside. It is about 10 specific structural habits that exist in Japanese money culture that almost never get discussed in American personal finance content, and that, when you look at the data, produce compounding results that dwarf what most budgeting apps and savings challenges ever will. These habits work at $38,000 a year, and they work at $97,400 a year. The income does not matter as much as you think. The architecture does. Let's start with the wound, because there is one. And if you have ever sat in a car in a parking lot after buying something you did not need because you felt bad about something that had nothing to do with money, you already know what I'm talking about. The American financial system is not designed to help you save. It is designed elegantly, expensively, with billions of dollars of behavioral research behind it, to separate you from whatever is left after your fixed costs are paid. The friction has been removed from spending and added to saving. Buying something takes 3 seconds. Setting up an automatic transfer to a brokerage account takes 45 minutes if you're lucky and involves at least 2 verification emails. According to a 2025 Bankrate study, 57% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency expense from savings. Not because they earn too little, because the system they are operating inside was never designed to help them accumulate. It was designed to help them consume. Japanese money culture operates under a fundamentally different philosophy. Not because Japanese people are inherently more disciplined, that framing is both lazy and wrong, but because the structural norms around money there create different default behaviors, and defaults are everything. The first habit, and the one that underpins almost all of the others, is something called Kakeibo. It translates roughly as household financial ledger, and it has been practiced in Japan since 1904 when a journalist named Hani Motoko introduced it as a tool for empowering women to manage household finances. The Kakeibo is not a budget. It is a monthly ritual of writing down by hand 4 questions. How much money do I have? How much do I want to save? How much am I spending and on what? How can I improve? Every month by hand, on paper, not in an app, not in a spreadsheet, by hand. Here is why that matters and why it is not as quaint as it sounds. A 2024 study published in Psychological Science found that writing information by hand produces significantly stronger memory encoding and behavioral commitment than typing the same information. When you physically write down that you spent $214 at restaurants last month, something different happens neurologically than when you see it auto-categorized in an app. The discomfort is not buffered. You feel the number, and feeling the number, not just seeing it, changes what you do next. The Kakeibo is not a record-keeping tool. It is a decision-making tool disguised as a record-keeping tool. The second habit is Mottainai. This word has no direct English translation, which tells you something meaningful about how it functions. It roughly means, what a waste. But it carries a weight of genuine grief and respect for the potential that is being squandered. When a Japanese grandmother says Mottainai about a half-eaten plate of food, she is not just commenting on waste. She is invoking a cultural value that runs from objects to time to money to energy. Nothing is discarded before its full potential has been extracted. In practical money terms, this means something specific. A 2025 survey by the Japan Productivity Center found that Japanese consumers keep durable goods, appliances, furniture, clothing, an average of 2.3 times longer than American consumers. That is not because they cannot afford to replace things, it is because replacement before the end of useful life is culturally something to feel bad about. On your income, and I am not making up this math, if you extended the useful life of your car by just 3 years and invested the difference in monthly payments into a broad market index fund, you would have between $18,000 and $31,000 more over a 10-year window depending on your rate. Mottainai is not about being cheap. It is about recognizing that early replacement is a form of quiet financial leakage. Pause this video right now. I want you to pick up your phone or open another tab and look at the last 3 things you bought that cost more than $50. For each one, write down or just honestly think about, did you need it or did you feel something and then buy it? I am not asking you to feel guilty. I am asking you to notice the gap, if there is one, between the feeling and the function. Because that gap, that space between the emotion and the purchase, is exactly where Habit 3 lives. Habit 3 is called Ma. Ma is a Japanese aesthetic and philosophical concept that means intentional empty space. In architecture, it is the silence between notes. In daily life, it is the deliberate pause before action. In money psychology, it is the practice of creating space, physical, temporal, and emotional, between the impulse to spend and the act of spending. Japanese consumers are significantly more likely to practice what behavioral economists call a cooling off period before non-essential purchases. Not because they are told to, because the cultural relationship with empty space makes waiting feel like wisdom rather than deprivation. Here is what nobody tells you about impulse spending in America. According to a 2025 NerdWallet consumer survey, the average American makes approximately $314 in unplanned purchases every single month. That is $3,768 a year. Over 30 years at 7% average annual returns, that is not a small number. That is $378,000. That is the price of a house in a significant chunk of this country. It went to things that were bought in the space between an emotion and a breath. If you are sitting here right now doing the mental math on your own unplanned spending and feeling a little nauseous, good, not because you should feel bad, but because that feeling is information. And here is the thing I need you to hear before we go further. The system you are operating inside is specifically designed to eliminate MA. Every notification, for every one-click checkout, every only 3 left in stock banner, these are engineered to close the gap between feeling and purchasing. You have not been failing to practice willpower. You have been trying to exercise willpower against a billion-dollar infrastructure designed to defeat it. That is not a personal flaw. That is a structural mismatch. Let me give you a character. Her name is Patricia. She is a dental hygienist in Columbus, Ohio. She earns $61,400 a year before taxes, about $4,100 a month after. She has $3,200 in savings, $9,700 in credit card debt, and contributes 3% to her 401k. Because that is what she did when she started at the practice and never changed it. She is not reckless. She is not irresponsible. She is operating on default settings inside a system that set those defaults without her input. Now meet Kenji. He is a logistics coordinator in Osaka. He earns the equivalent of approximately $57,800 a year, less than Patricia in raw numbers, but his household savings rate is 22%. He keeps a Kakeibo, he practices Mottainai, he waits 72 hours before any discretionary purchase over $40. He has the equivalent of $41,000 in savings and zero consumer debt. The difference between Patricia and Kenji is not discipline, it is architecture. Kenji is not stronger. He is operating inside a different set of defaults, and those defaults compound. This is not financial advice, and what I am describing is not a prescribed formula for your specific situation, but the math here is not subtle. Patricia, at her current trajectory, will retire at 67 with Social Security as her primary income and approximately $84,000 in her 401k if she maintains a 3% contribution rate, according to projections based on average market returns. If she raised that rate to 12%, which her salary can support if the structural leakage is addressed, she would retire with approximately $497,000 in her account. Same income, different architecture. The fourth habit is Furoshiki, the practice of using a single cloth for wrapping, carrying, gifting, and storing, rather than using disposable packaging. On its surface, this sounds like a craft project. Underneath it is a philosophy of multi-use that bleeds into every financial decision. Japanese households are significantly more likely to find multiple uses for every dollar spent and every item owned. The psychological frame is not, "I am saving money by being frugal." The frame is, "I am being intelligent by using what I have fully before seeking more." That reframe, from deprivation to intelligence, changes the emotional valence of the entire habit. Habit 5 is the concept of Ikigai applied to spending. Ikigai is most commonly described as your reason for being, the intersection of what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But in money culture, Ikigai spending means spending on what genuinely contributes to your sense of purpose and meaning, and declining to spend on what does not. A 2024 study in the Journal of Economic Psychology found that people who could clearly articulate the emotional function of their purchases, not just the practical function, spent an average of 31% less on discretionary categories while reporting higher life satisfaction scores. The Japanese framework of aligned spending is not about spending less, it is about spending with intention so intentional that accidental spending almost disappears. Habit 6 is something that surprised me the most when I started looking into this. It is called N, the concept of connection and relationship as currency. Japanese financial culture has a strong tradition of community-based financial resilience, mutual aid networks, neighborhood lending circles, and the practice of giving quality gifts that maintain relationships are not considered expenses. They are considered investments in a social safety net that functions as real financial insurance. The idea that your relationships are part of your financial security is not poetic, it is mathematical. According to a 2025 Harvard study on social capital and financial resilience, people with strong community bonds are 47% less likely to experience financial catastrophe after an income disruption, because the support structure exists before it is needed. Habit 7 is Hara Hachi, Boo, the practice of eating until you are 80% full. You may have heard this described purely as a health concept, but follow the financial thread. American households waste an average of $1,600 worth of food per year, according to 2025 data from the USDA Economic Research Service. Japanese households waste less than half that amount. Multiply that by 30 years and compound the difference, and you are looking at $74,000 at 7% returns from food waste alone. The same principle of intentional stopping before excess, Hara Hachibu, applied to consumption broadly, runs through every category of Japanese spending. Stop before you have too much. Stop before you have spent too much. Stop before you have bought more than you need. The discipline of the incomplete is a financial strategy. Here is where it gets structural. Habit 8 is what I would call the envelope over the app. Japan remains one of the world's most cash-heavy economies despite having access to every digital payment technology available. This is not backwardness. According to a 2025 Bank of Japan report, approximately 68% of retail transactions in Japan are still conducted in cash, a number that has barely moved in a decade despite massive investment in digital infrastructure. And behavioral economists have a strong theory about why this persists. Cash hurts. Physically handing money to another person activates a different neurological response than tapping a card or clicking a button. A 2024 study from MIT's Sloan School found that consumers who paid in cash spent an average of 23% less per transaction than those who used contactless payment on identical items. The pain of payment is a feature, not a bug, and Japan kept it. Habit 9 is savings first architecture, which is called Chokin in Japanese. The concept is simple. The savings come out first before anything else, and what is left is the spending budget. Not the reverse, not saving what is left over, saving what is decided, then living on what remains. A 2025 Vanguard behavioral finance study found that households that automated savings before discretionary spending saved an average of 3.4 times more annually than households that saved at the end of the month. Patricia, our dental hygienist in Columbus, saves at the end. There is rarely anything at the end. The system guarantees it. And the 10th habit, the one that ties everything together, is something I think of as the philosophy of the unseeable. In Japanese aesthetics, there is a concept called Wabi-Sabi, finding beauty in imperfection, transience, and incompleteness. In money, this manifests as something powerful, a profound lack of interest in visible wealth signaling. According to a 2025 survey conducted by Rakuten Insight, Japanese consumers ranked looking financially successful to others last out of 12 financial motivations. Americans ranked it fourth. The resources that are not spent performing wealth are available to become actual wealth. This is not accidental. It is a structural difference in what money is for. Let me step back here because I want to be clear about something. This video is not about saying Japan is better than America. It is not about judging your friends who have nice cars and new things and a lifestyle that looks good from the outside. Nearly every financial behavior I have described today exists on a spectrum. And the American defaults that work against saving were built by companies with billions of dollars and thousands of researchers whose only job was to make spending easier and saving harder. You were not handed a fair starting position. Nobody told you the game had already started. What these 10 habits represent: Kakeibo, Mottainai, Furoshiki, Ikigai spending, and Hara, Hachi, the physical pain of cash, Chokin, and the refusal to perform wealth. It is not a foreign system you have to import wholesale. It is a set of structural principles that already have overwhelming research support in behavioral economics, and that you can begin applying one at a time without changing your income by a single dollar. Money is not what you earn. It is what survives the gap between earning it and the moment you actually need it. The people who end up with options, real options, not just the option to choose between debts, are not the people who earned the most. They are the people who closed the gap, who made the architecture work for them instead of against them. Who decided that the quiet accumulation of actual wealth was more interesting than the loud performance of imaginary wealth? Every habit in this video is a different way of closing that gap, and the gap, once closed, does not reopen unless you let it. Drop a comment right now and tell me, which one of these 10 habits is hardest for you personally? Is it the cash thing, the waiting period, the impulse buying you can feel coming before it happens? I want to know where the real friction is for you, and I read every single comment. If you want to keep thinking about money differently, subscribe. There is a lot more coming on this channel, on the structural systems that work against regular people and the ones that quietly work for them, and you do not want to miss it. And if this video was worth your time, hit the like button. Randy talks. Money is brand new, and every like is how this reaches the people who actually need to hear it.